Hey everybody, and welcome to Views on Vue. I'm Ben Hong, a senior front-end engineer on the Meltano team at GitLab. And today on the panel we have Chris Fritz, Vue Vue core team docs extraordinaire. And we have Natalia, who's also on the docs team and on the core team as well.
Hello.
And today our guest is Michele Cynowicz.
Hello.
Hey folks, I just want to let you know quickly about Netlify. Netlify is a really cool system for hosting what are traditionally known as static sites. However, the real benefit that I've been finding is that I don't have to mess with a back end. I can just set things up. I build the website out. I've been using a system called 11DJS, and you just deploy it. And then anything that you have that you want to do, you can do on the front end. So if you want to pull in some kind of database with Firebase or something else, if you want to collect form data, Netlify provides all kinds of services that make it easy to do all that stuff. If you're trying to do serverless, they have a really, really neat serverless setup that will allow you to deploy your websites without having to deploy a back end, and it'll do some of the work for you. I just love it. So if you're looking for a way that you can actually deploy a website that only has front-end technology in it, gives you all the tools that you typically need for the back end without having to actually program the back end, then give them a try. Go check them out at netlify.com.
Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I am a front-end engineer with Vox Media. We are a digital publishing group that powers such websites that your audience may be familiar with, like TheVerge.com, Polygon.com, Vox.com, Recode.net, Curb.com, and Eater.com, among the entire sports blog nation, SBNation.com.
Whoa.
I know.
So can you tell us a little bit about like the architecture of like your applications and like how this works? Like what kind of technologies are you using?
As a publishing group, we have a system that we call Korus. Korus is an editor for digital publishers. It allows them to log into a system that's specifically built for digital publications. It has features for writing your editorial, serving drafts to an editor. It allows users to search an image database, search a video database to insert images and video. It allows them to decide what will be pull quotes, what will be headlines, what will be subtitles and author bylines. It allows them to format tweets when they want to publish an article that will automatically tweet or will post to other social media. It handles a lot of editorial services, like two people can edit at one time. There is an approval process for editors, and the part, of course, that I work on is our video management system. So all of our digital publishers have teams that create video content, and that video content has to live somewhere. So the video management system allows the video producers to track all of their video content with metadata, and let's say a director, a writer, a personality that's on the video. It allows them to decide if the video will play in a YouTube player or will be ported out to Facebook or will be embedded with monetization, so it'll have advertisements. And that entire system kind of stands alone and integrates with the rest of Korus, wherein when someone's writing an article and they want to embed a video, they can search for the video that they're looking for and embed it into their article.
So would you call that like that part of Korus like a microservice or like a mini application or like?
It's a fully fledged, totally separate application, but it is integrated in a way. So users can access their videos from logging into our video management system on their own. And they can do all sorts of video management things there without ever logging into the editor. But they can also access their videos from the editor when creating content for their articles.
It's like a separate application from the rest of Google services, but also ties into other Google services.
Yes, that would be a good analogy. Yes, the application that I work on, we call that Korus Video.
Korus Video.
So there's Korus Editor and Korus Video, and they integrate in that way. So Korus Video started out as a Rails app. It's still a Rails app, and it's been around for a couple of years as this Rails app. But we did have some need to upgrade the user experience. As any application that starts out small and then scales, you have to meet new needs as the product grows.
Real quick, for those who might not be familiar, you're talking about like Ruby on Rails, like a backend web framework where you write Ruby rather than JavaScript to manage like the backend, and it can also like serve HTML, and you can use it completely independent, so that like it doesn't even have to be used with like a front end framework like Vue or something like that.
Right. In fact, I would say that Rails in itself is the front end framework that sits on a Ruby backend. So it's already a templating system, Rails. It has its own template syntax. It has its own build system. And the build system there is called the asset pipeline. And one of the things about Rails is that it's a very opinionated framework in such that it's not configurable by nature. It is convention-based. So you be able to create an application and build out the front end of this application, and everything that becomes your end result is highly dependent on where you place things. Sometimes people call this Rails magic. Like, oh, it just works. I don't know how it works. Oh, that's Rails magic, right?
So everything just works out of the box, so you can be like super productive. But then when you try to do things not the Rails way, in quotes, then things get a little bit more difficult to configure.
Correct. It is very mysterious how some of those things just work. And I came into front end from design. I have a design background, and working for Vox on this application was my first experience with Rails. And I'm still of the school of like, I should be able to control how my front end is built. And so I've never really come to terms with Rails. Like, we tolerate each other, but we've never really fallen in love or anything like that. So
you're sort of like roommates that get along okay, but you really wish Rails would do the dishes more often.
Yes, exactly that. You hit it on the head. So as we decide that we need to scale our user experience, right? What this becomes, I guess the other thing I should mention is that Rails being on Ruby is still a CRUD interface. So for people who don't know what CRUD is, it's a create, read, update, delete. And because of its highly opinionated structure, this means that everything that you want to do from the user perspective, everything you want to click on, everything you want to change, by its nature in a Rails app requires a page refresh. You need to submit a form, you need to open it, needs to reload the page or go to a new location. And as the rise of the reactive user experience comes up, this starts to feel really slow. And as we want to redesign things and make them feel faster, what had ended up happening was we started adding lots and lots of jQuery to the front end.
I've been there.
Everything was an AJAX request, so it didn't take the user away from the screen, but it stored the data change.
So by AJAX request, do you mean like it's like fetching more data from the API, and then like jQuery is like changing something on the page in order to like update the HTML in place rather than doing a page refresh?
Exactly.
Okay.
So we're kind of faking the reactive experience in that way with and circumventing how Rails is intended to work, right? Because then we have to access that data with the API, right? With the AJAX to make those changes without submitting them through a page request, through a form submission as we would normally do. So we're already circumventing all the things that Rails is supposed to make easy for the front end by just overloading it with jQuery and AJAX. Right? And now we want to make it more so. It's an issue of scale, right? especially with the fact that anytime you want to be able to make that change, you have to service that API request.
So what, for example, like, where did you find Rails fighting you a little bit?
The most difficult one in the case of our video management system was the ability to upload a video. Mm-hmm. So the file upload process was actually handled with handlebars as there was a plugin, a jQuery plugin for file upload, and we used handlebars in that one space to kind of give the user the sense of the content changing quickly, things that we wouldn't be able to do with Rails, essentially. Mm-hmm. And then they would kick off a file upload, but they'd have to keep that tab open. They'd have to keep that URL open for as long as that upload was running. And in the case of, say, a 30-minute video upload, depending on the user's connection speed, they could be waiting 30 minutes for that upload to complete, and they cannot navigate away from the browser tab that they're in. And this makes for a frustrating user experience for, okay, I'm here on the video management application. I want to upload my video. I have to open this in a new tab, and I have to remember I cannot close it. Right.
Yeah, and they can't do anything else. They have to open up a completely new tab in order to do other things in other parts of the app, right?
Yes, exactly. And this was a pain point, right? Because you want to be able to send an upload, and it might take a while, but while it's taking its time, you want to be able to do things like pause the upload. You want to be able to do things like, oh, while that video is uploading, let me type in some metadata or description or, other things that people could do in the application for a video project that didn't involve like sitting around and watching a progress bar go across the screen.
And it's something I've noticed when you watch the progress bars, they don't move. They only move when you look away.
A watched upload never completes.
Yeah.
So the key to improving this user experience and improving, I guess what you could say, the developer experience behind it is to, the obvious answer is to make this a reactive JavaScript front end, because that's what all the cool kids are doing, right? So we come into this question of how to redesign the user experience, and every pain point that's addressed in the design process as they iterate on what we want, what the user wants, what makes this easier for the user to do their work, to not have this open tab that's always uploading something. And the answer comes from the design, right? The design process tells us that we absolutely need a better user experience, a better front end than what we have with Rails and jQuery and this one piece that uses handlebars. Mm-hmm. So then we come to the question of, well, if we need to be using a reactive front end, what do we use? And how do we implement it? Do we build up an entirely separate app to be the front end and do everything with microservices? And that was an option we explored. And we decided against it for time and effort purposes. Mm-hmm. I did a lot of research. I tested and prototyped both React and VueJS. I settled on VueJS. Maybe we don't need to go into why I settled on VueJS.
I'd actually be curious to hear that.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, because at what point was it like Vue 2 at this point, or was this back in like Vue 1?
No, it was Vue 2, but it was, I want to say, earlier Vue 2. So this was 2017 when we were researching and prototyping things. And I learned React. Like I had to go out and learn React and build a prototype in React to decide if React was the thing to use. And then I did that whole prototype and then I put it aside. And then I did the same process with VueJS.
And were you also learning Vue at the time?
I had to learn each framework in order to prototype it. I wasn't familiar with any reactive JavaScript frameworks at that point.
Wow, that's quite a task.
Yeah, that's impressive.
What struck me, though, was that for learning React, I took the Westboss React for Beginners course, the whole course.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it was great. Westboss is great. And I did learn React indeed from taking the course. And I did catapult into building my own prototype right afterwards. But there was something, I want to blame it on the syntax, right? I want to blame JSX for everything. There's something about, the way that the syntax was for building React components that took me a long time. And learning curve and developer knowledge was part of the criteria to make this decision. Was like, if I choose React and we build this in React, how easy will it be for everyone else in the company, anyone else in our engineering department, someone on another team to come into this code base and look at this bug, look at this issue, and say that they can figure it out and that they don't also need to take the Westboss React for Beginners course in order to be able to help out on this project.
Yeah.
And the funny thing was there was no Westboss VueJS for Beginners course. I couldn't find at that point, I couldn't find a fully comprehensive course like that to take for VueJS. So what I ended up doing was reading a lot of resources and a few video tutorials that I did find at the time. Laracasts has a Vue 2 step-by-step that is really short, digestible snippets of video tutorial, which I enjoyed. About the 15th tutorial, they start actually looking at Laravel. But up until that point, it's all Vue.js. And there is no PHP involved at all in the course until you get to that point later on down the road. And so between reading resources like Sarah Drasner's series on CSS tricks and reading the docs and just going through a few of those tutorials, I picked up on Vue.js so much faster. Particularly, I want to say because of the single file component structure. I will quote Pine Wu here in that is that the beauty of the single file component in Vue is that it reads just like a CodePen layout. And I felt like that was the feeling that I had even before I'd seen Pine Wu speak, that was it. That as someone who comes from design and HTML, CSS, and JavaScript being my bread and butter from the beginning, looking at that was very comforting. And it was easy to understand what I was doing, much easier to understand what I was doing in a single file component than a JSX style component. And Vue.js gave me that and React did not. So I was more comfortable working with Vue.js and I was able to build my Vue.js prototype twice as fast as my React prototype.
Wow, nice.
So my judgment call there was we should use Vue.js because you don't have to take a whole course to know how it works. You don't have to take a whole class in order to be able to help out on this project if you're from another team.
Yeah, you jump into a component file and you think, oh, I know this. Here's my CSS and it's just CSS. Here's my HTML. And I can put in any HTML there. And JavaScript, I can put in any JavaScript.
Yeah, I had a good time building with Vue.js there in that prototype phase. And then it was a matter of, does it need to integrate with Rails? And if it does, how does it? Right? Because again, we came to that. The first decision was, which framework do we use? And then the next decision was, how do we implement? Do we build an entire Vue.js front end and turn the entire Rails and Ruby backend into just a series of microservices that crosstalk between two applications? Or is there another way to do this? And we explored, as a team, we explored both. Our backend engineers wrote up two entirely separate engineers wrote up two entirely separate dev plans, what it would take to go microservices route and what it would take to just implement VueJS on the Rails app that we already have. And either one would have worked, but we decided to go with the second option for putting VueJS onto Rails because of time constraints and resource needs. That we just didn't have enough people and QA testing and time to go the route of build an entirely separate app and turn the other one into microservices. So now it was a matter of what is that process like putting VueJS into Rails. So I did give a conference talk on this at Google DevFest Florida, and it is on YouTube, like how the code works if you want to do this thing. You might want to put the link to that in the show notes because it's a good 20-minute talk. I do talk about like how Rails is a framework and VueJS is a framework. Rails is a framework that is very opinionated and convention-based and built on Ruby. And VueJS is configuration-based and is not as opinionated, and it's built in Node. So you have to marry these two together and kind of like find a space to fit your VueJS front end into that Rails app, that very opinionated convention and structure. So it's a process, and it required at the time the WebPacker Gem for Ruby.
And a gem, just for people who aren't familiar with Ruby, that's like a package, right?
Correct. So where we have the Node package ecosystem, we use Node packages. And for Ruby, they have their own ecosystem, and their packages are called gems. And in this case, Webpack has like a wrapper gem for Webpack that's called WebPacker, and you would install the WebPacker gem into your Rails project. And from there, you'd be able to install things that use Webpack. You'd be able to configure an actual package.json file, and then you have Webpack configuration capabilities. So the version of Rails that we use, I'm told, and I can't verify this, but I've heard rumor that Rails, which uses something called an asset pipeline for building assets, the asset pipeline is going to be deprecated in favor of Webpack in Rails. So there's a chance that that what I've done here and what's in this other conference talk where I talk about the technical details of putting your Vue.js application into Rails, it may become deprecated in itself because future versions of Rails may just use Webpack. But in this case, you need a WebPacker gem in order to run Webpack. And that gives you the capability of putting these JavaScript frameworks that use Webpack into your very opinionated convention-based Rails app.
So what additional features does that give you over just using the asset pipeline?
The asset pipeline is very specific, and it doesn't allow you to set up JavaScript in modules like ES6 flavored syntax. So you put your assets here, you put your style sheets in this asset style sheet folder, you put your partials here, you use a manifest here, and this creates your built asset files, your built JavaScript files, your compiled style sheets from Sass. So the asset pipeline actually requires you to put things in a directory called assets, requires you to separate them based on the type of file that they are, and assumes that in the end, when you build your Rails app, that you are anticipating having like one CSS file and one JavaScript file that kind of services your entire application.
So it'll compile your assets, but it doesn't allow you to like reference them as separate modules, like you were saying.
Correct.
So you can't like import some package, into this file, and then do cool things like async possible, and things like that. And
Yep.
you can't do single file view components, presumably, because you can't modify that compilation process, it sounds like.
Correct. You would not be able to just put in VueJS single file components in there and do the asset pipeline to compile that. Like you would not, I mean, maybe you could, maybe someone has done it. But from my standpoint, being the person who never really got along with Rails and never mastered the conventions.
Maybe you could do it, but you'd have to fight.
Yeah, pretty much. I did not explore trying to, shall we say, break into the asset pipeline, especially because in our case, we still needed to maintain some legacy application functionality in Rails. So we actually did need to maintain our asset pipeline as it was, while also adding VueJS to our app and to our build system. So this way made the most sense. And since it worked, we just went with it.
Sounds good. Sounds practical. And so like using WebPacker, you are able to use all of these features. And then did you start like sprinkling in like a little bit of interactivity into your Rails templates? Or did you completely get rid of the templates and then replace all of it with just like the front end handled by Vue, and then Rails is basically just an API?
We did both. So like I said, we kept a lot of our legacy space, a lot of what was in legacy. Part of this is we have to remember that this is an application that is in use. It's in heavy use. Like it's used every day by hundreds of people, and they're in a lot of places they're paying customers. So we have to be aware of who is getting a new user experience for what reason at what stage. So it wasn't like we were going to build the whole thing and just flip the switch and everybody gets, shiny new experience on one day. We did need to consider the rollout process of this change. So while migrating, you've got to like still be building new features and fixing bugs and like responding to like things that users need or complain about. Right. That's exactly where it was.
You can't just shut down the business and say we're rewriting the app for a month.
Right. We could not do that. There is a very distinct path that we took where once we were able to get WebPacker set up and we were able to put VueJS as a thing into that Rails, so what I'm looking for, that Rails convention of directory structure and how all those files need to be. Mm-hmm. There are a few more considerations about the developer experience that came up. We needed to consider hot reloading for testing and how Webpack handles the assets that are being iterated on when you're running this application locally. But what ultimately came to be was we looked at state management and we looked at being able to determine if a user was going to be a legacy user experience user or a beta user experience user. And we were able to build out a single page application for beta, and we were able to add standalone components, VueJS components for legacy. And in many cases, we were able to use one component and have it exist in both places. So we would have, for example, the first thing that I rebuilt with VueJS was our navigation. So we called this navigation like the global header. And that global header takes a state that decides if the user is on a legacy or if they're in beta. And if they're in legacy, they will see the legacy logo, they will see the legacy title, they will see links that take them to the legacy user experience. And if they are in beta, they will see the beta version of all of that. But it's one Vue component. And in one case, we use WebPacker WebPacker gives you this, like what's called a PAX tag. We were able to make a PAX tag that loads just the global header component. And then we can just pop that into our layout file for legacy and put it right above our yield tag that shows the entire front end of the page. And then we're also able to create an app.view component, which is our parent component for all the single page app stuff, which is our beta experience. From there, we can put that same global header component into the app.view component, and it will recognize the state as being the beta state, and it will show all of the beta information on the page. So it's one component that we built, but it exists in this kind of duplicitous way, where in one case it's a standalone component in a Rails page, and in another it's a child component to our single page app.
This is actually great, because I was going to ask if you were building an SPA or standalone applications on the page, because GitLab is built the second way. And I really like the way you migrated to the beta with SPA, because I think we will probably have the same way for GitLab. Because right now we have only some applications, and we will need at some point to migrate to SPA. And I really like this approach with we have a beta where the header is integrated. I really like this approach.
This episode is sponsored by Sentry.io. Recently, I came across a great tool for tracking and monitoring problems in my apps. Then I asked them if they wanted to sponsor the show and allow me to share my experience with you. Sentry provides a terrific interface for keeping track of what's going on with my app. It also tracks releases so I can tell if what I deployed makes things better or worse. They give you full stack traces and as much information as possible about the situation when the error occurred to help you track down the errors. Plus, one thing I love, you can customize the context provided by Sentry. So, if you're looking for specific information about the request, you can provide it. It automatically scrubs passwords and secure information, and you can customize the scrubbing as well. Finally, it has a user feedback system built in that you can use to get information from your users. Oh, and I also love that they support open source to the point where they actually open sourced Sentry if you want to self-host it. Use the code devchat at Sentry.io to get 2 months free on Sentry's small plan. That's code devchat at Sentry.io.
And how did you, Michele, how did you find this approach? Are there things you would have done differently? Were there any pain points you noticed?
This approach was my idea.
It was brilliant, first of all.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much.
No, I'm just trying to summarize your thoughts. And it's I think I'm a genius.
Perfect.
No, but really, were there some parts of it, even if the general approach worked pretty well, were there some aspects that you would have done differently?
I guess, in hindsight, it would have been easier to just build out the single page application, even if it was inside of the Rails architecture, and just do that thing that we said we didn't want to do, which was just flip that switch. I did have to jump through a few hoops for supporting state management and user management in the legacy version, things that I didn't need to deal with for the beta version. One of the things I guess I haven't mentioned yet in this is that we also made a move to GraphQL for a lot of our data, but not all of it. So in total, there's this other back-end stuff that's going on to improve our back-end systems and our services. So at the same time, there are changes happening with where the data comes from and how the data is managed. So in many ways, we're also switching, how the data comes to the front end, where it doesn't just come to the front end from, Rails data, it comes to the front end from GraphQL. So there were some pain points in getting the right data to the right component in our legacy system, which I didn't need to worry about so much when we did the single page app, because everything we did in the single page app just came through GraphQL. But I had to handle cases of data coming through Rails in the standalone components. So that was one thing I had not foreseen when we made this call. And I could have saved some effort if we didn't go that route at all with these components standalone with Rails data. But at the same time, it was kind of a good exercise. It was good practice for our team, especially when deciding how to reformat some of that data to come through GraphQL, and to say that, like, wow, when we try to pull this data in from Rails, it's not formatted exactly like how we'd want it to be. So the process of trying to put some of that data from Rails into the single standalone components in the legacy part of the application helped to inform how we would format the data that was coming from GraphQL when that data was coming from GraphQL. So it was a bit of a pain point, but it also had good turnaround. Like it turned out to be a really good thing because of how it helped inform those changes.
Cool. So it sounds like you would have mostly done the same, but maybe you would have gone for like a spa and migrated, but still done it like pretty gradually, where you had like the spa really just be like the single page application really just being a single page, and then migrating an entire other page and then an entire other page and doing it one page at a time rather than doing partial pages.
Yeah, that could have worked too. That could have been less, I guess you could say, less mental gymnastics on data.
Oh, that's not what you were saying?
No, I'm agreeing with you in that.
Oh, okay.
Yes, you've got it. There could have been other ways to roll it out slowly that would have been, less mental gymnastics. But overall, we were very happy with the project and the way it turned out. And we still have legacy screens. We still have pages that are just kind of admin-based pages that still are 100% Rails, with the exception of the header, the navigation. But what that means is those are screens that are for admins. So not all of our users see those screens, and most of them won't see those screens, and they don't care so much. So it's almost like a tech debt project now to port those over so that they have the same look and feel as the rest of the application, because all of our users now are seeing the beta.
Cool.
I have a question regarding GraphQL and state management, because we're going to speak about state management. So do you use any GraphQL clients on your front end, like Apollo or Relay or something?
We are using Apollo.
And you still combine it with Vuex, right?
Yes.
Oh, can you please describe how do you do this? Because it's really interesting.
I don't know if I can describe how I do this.
I can totally feel it.
You just go into a flow state and it happens.
I did not work on this project alone. I did have a team, and my part in it, aside from doing the initial research and prototyping and decision, I didn't manage a lot of the build out of what it eventually becomes our data through Apollo, our GraphQL. And then just like, we do use Vuex. Is it Vuex? I never know how to pronounce it. Vuex, Vuex. Everybody.
I say Vuex.
Okay.
I think most people are saying Vuex, but yeah, both are acceptable. No one really cares.
This is going to be the great debate that comes up after GIF versus GIF.
Well, that's not a debate, but I won't get into that.
GIF, right?
GIF, of course.
Of course, GIF.
As far as state management, yes. So we bring that data in and we commit of it to the state, right? Because we need to be able to, let's say, for the case of a project that one of our users is working on, this is a video project. It has a title. It has people who worked on it. It has what we call mezzanine files, so original video files that haven't been transcoded or flattened, or it's like they're full file weight files. You have multiple versions of those mezzanine files because some of them will be edited for different platforms. So you'll have one edit for YouTube, and you'll have one edit for Facebook, and you'll have one edit for another platform, and we have multiple platforms that we manage. So you'll have one project And that project will have all sorts of data associated with it for all of these different things, whether that's the location of a file that has been uploaded, which platform and which account belongs to this project. So, for instance, if a video project is done by Vox.com, then we need to know that this project belongs to Vox.com. And because this project belongs to Vox.com, it sends to YouTube via the Vox.com YouTube account. It sends to Facebook on the Vox.com Facebook account. It has authentication secrets and all sorts of fun bits of data that we don't necessarily expose on the front end. But we need to be able to say, okay, this data is here, and we need to use it to make certain determinations in the front end of what the user will see and what will happen with your file when you click certain buttons. So we get all that data, and some of it is stored in the state if we need it. And if we don't need it in the state, we mutate it where it is and we forget about it. So there's lots of things that get stored in the state, and then there's lots of things that don't. And it's very regimented as to like what is stored when and why. I have no idea if that answers your question.
Yeah, totally. I'm asking because we had the similar discussion within GitLab, because we also introduced Apollo, and we had a discussion about state management. Should we use Vuex or should we rely on Apollo State Manager? And it was really hard to decide. That's why I'm asking for questions somewhere, because we decided to use Apollo State Management, and we're using it right now. And it's very experimental for us. So we actually didn't find a good way to integrate Apollo with Vuex, because as a result, we have data stored in two places, in Apollo Cache and in Vuex. That's why we actually decided to have Apollo State Management. But I'm really interested in different combinations of them. Thank you for answering. You actually answered my question.
Wow. See, I am good.
You are.
So, Michele, you mentioned that Vox has obviously all these publications and things. So, do you have like a sort of design system, like component library that Vox sort of shares internally between projects, or how is that managed?
Yes, we have a design system. It's called Resonance. There's been some write-ups about it on the Vox product blog. So if someone wants to know the nitty-gritty details about how we implemented that, that's available for read. Resonance is a design system. So it has fonts and colors and sizes and rules, but it also is a component library. And the component library part of our design system is built with web components. When I talked about that prototyping project where I built with React and I built with VueJS, part of the criteria for the prototype was that the framework that we chose had to work well with the component library with our design system, our Resonance components. The beauty of using web components for your design system is that it actually worked with both the same. So it was great in React and it was great in Vue. So that was not a deciding factor on the framework choice at all, because it could have been either one. Since the time that we said, okay, we're going to go with Vue.js overall as a recommendation for the framework for our applications, we have acquired other applications within Vox that do use React.js, and they also are now using our Resonance design system component library, which uses all web components. So to the power of web components, we can say that this is a framework agnostic concept, but it works great with Vue. So it's a beautiful thing. But what we do is that design system, those web components are a private node package, which is subject to versioning and upgrades of its own. So we do have a system in place for capturing different versions and notifying people of breaking changes when a new version comes out. some of our applications will be on old versions of our resonance library, and some applications will be on newer versions. So we still have to maintain those older versions, but it works really well when we try to roll out new features within the design system, and when we upgrade things within the design system, that we have the time and space to go back into the consuming application and say, okay, we want to upgrade to the latest version of Resonance. What are the breaking changes and how does that affect this application before we go ahead and upgrade?
And is each component versioned individually, or do you have like a version for like the whole design system in general, and then you just bump everything up and you get all the updates to all the components?
The versioning is for the whole system in general. We do have like a doc site for the design system that gives information on the components that will kind of reiterate a history. So one example is we have a date picker component, and the date picker was maybe added to Resonance at version like 0.18, right? But then nobody used it for a while, and somebody decided they wanted to try to integrate it into one of their apps, and they found a bug, and that bug had to be fixed. And the bug fix for that component happened to be at like 1.5. So when 1.5 was released, they could say, okay, this fixes this bug with the date picker component. So if you're using date pickers in your consuming app, you can go ahead and upgrade to 1.5 and your date pickers will be fixed. But if you go into the history of the date picker component itself, there's only two changes, 0.18 and 1.5. Whereas there were many changes in between 0.18 and 1.5 that happened to other components, but the history is only written in significant for the version changes that affect that component. Does that make sense? I don't know if explaining it provides quite the visual that one needs to understand how that works.
That makes sense to me.
Makes sense to me too.
Okay, good.
So I guess in conjunction with that, so is all the CSS then managed at like a global style sheet, or has Vox looked into leveraging maybe like scope styles or CSS modules from on the Vue side?
Are you talking about how CSS is managed for the design system?
Sure, or like just within the application, like is it a mix of like a global CSS sheet from Resonance and then like some like other ones as well?
So the CSS for Resonance is provided within the node package. So it's all part of it. So the CSS itself is versioned along with the package itself. So we do reference Resonance, and there is a piece of that Resonance CSS or the Resonance package that outputs Sass variables. So when I create a VueJS component within my app and I want to, say, use pieces of the design system or affect certain things about a component that aren't part of the original system or aren't part of the design system, I'm able to import the vars, the Sass vars, from the package as in a scoped style tag, and then I can play around with it in the style tag of that component as needed, which makes it very flexible. The nice thing about the Sass vars is that because they are mix-ins or because of the way that they're created as variables and used as mix-ins, when Webpack compiles the scoped styles when building out the application, there's no duplication there.
Very cool.
That's cool. Is there anything else that you think is kind of special or unique for your setup, and especially how you're integrating like Vue and Rails, that you'd like to share that you think is pretty neat that people could make use of?
I don't know if there's anything else to it that makes sense in the abstract. Dealing with the Rails data with the standalone Vue components in the Rails app, passing Rails data there, that is the trickiest part, I think, of the whole project. And I really don't know if I could describe how one makes that work. I mean, we made it work, but like I said, mental gymnastics, not something I think I could describe verbally. Definitely a thing I'd have to like show somebody a piece of code.
Do you have like blog posts or something like that?
I don't. I want to get to that point. I really do. Actually have a ticket in my next sprint where I have to write a blog post for something that I added to our process. But Vox product blog talks a lot about the things that we've done with our apps and our design system and our use of VueJS. I don't know that anybody has written anything about VueJS in Rails. Certainly nothing as comprehensive as that one talk I gave that's on YouTube. But yeah, I should probably start blogging at some point.
So if people Google that Vox product blog, and that's VOX, right?
Correct.
Great.
You can Google the Vox product blog, or you can go to YouTube and search for Michele Cynowicz, and you'll find my shifting to Vue talk from Google Dev Fest.
Yeah, and you'll have to look at the episode description to see how to spell that.
Yeah, we'll be including the video in the show notes for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The last name is always fun because I have become a master of spelling my last name over the phone phonetically for people who can't understand when I say C. I may have to say C as in cat, Y, N as in Nancy, O, W, I, C as in cat, Z as in zebra. And now whenever I call customer service or new doctor's office to make an appointment, I always have to spell the last name that way phonetically. And then I moved to Florida, and now I live on a street called Blue Hydrangea. And I can't tell you how much fun it is to spell hydrangea.
Hydrangea. I don't even know where I would.
Just Google it, and Google will correct you.
Exactly.
I actually have the same question for Natalia. Is there anything that you can think of, not to put you on the spot, and it's okay if you can't think of anything right now, where you're using Rails and Vue together that is, different from one of the ways that Michele described, and you think people could find it helpful because it works for you?
Chris, it's really funny because I'm trying to avoid Rails and working on Rails by any price. I don't want to dive into our Rails part because it's really old. Mm-hmm. And also, I'm trying to focus only on Vue, but we have a really interesting issue. I'm not sure what end-to-end testing is Michele using, but we are using RSpec, and it's Ruby-based end-to-end testing framework with Capybara. And I really hate writing end-to-end tests with it. Michele, by the way, what are you using for end-to-end?
It is a mixture. There is RSpec in our stack. There is very specific tests for Rails and for Ruby that I don't write. Our front-end test for the Vue.js stuff is limited to Vue test utilities and Jest. I have never written a Rails test or Ruby test.
I'm so jealous right now.
I think RSpec or Factory Girl maybe is a test framework that exists in our stack.
I think Factory Girl is for creating factories. I used to do a lot of Rails work. I actually like RSpec and Capybara.
Chris, do you want to work for GitLab?
We can talk about it. We can talk about it afterwards if you like. if you're looking for some extra help with something.
With RSpec tests, probably.
You probably have people on GitLab who are way better at with RSpec than me.
Nobody likes RSpec. You're the only person who likes it.
Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe it's gotten worse. I don't know. Or maybe I was just younger in my development career, so I didn't even know what good was.
You're young and naive.
Yeah. Well, cool. Should we move on to picks? Or actually, before we move on to picks, I'd be curious, Michele, could you tell us how can people find you on the internets and, find out more about what you're doing at Vox and stuff like that?
The only place to find me on the internets is at Michele Cynowicz on Twitter.
And we'll drop that in the show notes so people can know how to spell that as well.
Yeah, once you can spell it, I'm easy to find. I'm not like everywhere on social media, and there's only one Michele Cynowicz in the world, as I've found. So if you do find a Michele Cynowicz on the internet, it's me.
And if it's not her, let her know, and she'll take care of the problem. There can be only one. Cool.
This episode is brought to you by Triplebyte. Applying to programming jobs sucks. You have to put the right keywords in your resume, you spend hours and hours on the phone screens and take-home projects, and that's assuming the company even responds to your application. Well, if you're a software engineer, Triplebyte can help. They work with over 400 top tech companies, from big names like Dropbox and Adobe to exciting startups. You do one brief online interview with them, and if you do well, you go straight to final interviews with the company on their platform. It's like the Common App for software developers. Triplebyte does not look at your resume or where you went to school. All they care about is if you can code. I've helped dozens of software developers with various credentials get jobs, and this looks like a terrific way for you to get in and get interviewed and get a job without a lot of the hassle and overhead. You can go check them out at triplebyte.com/view. That's triplebyte.com, byte as in 8 bits. As a special offer for listeners of this show, if you take a job through Triplebyte, they'll offer you a $1,000 signing bonus.
So, Natalia, would you like to go first for picks?
Yes, and probably I won't be original. My picks for this week is Avengers Endgame. And I won't spoil anything, but if you haven't watched it, you should, because it's an endgame. It's a finish.
Oh my gosh. We need to talk afterwards, Natalia.
It was your pick, yeah?
Yes. Anyways, no. Anyway, we'll talk later.
Okay, that's it.
Okay, Ben, what about you?
Well, since Natalia took my pick, I got a book recommendation. Just finished a book called Building a StoryBrand, and it's a really interesting one on sort of the topic of how brands are built and sort of a lot of the fallacies when creating a brand, whether it's for yourself or your company. So if, finding ways to tell your story and learning about that is, interesting to you, definitely check it out. It's by Donald Miller.
All right. How about you, Michele?
I also have a book. Not much of a fun subject as Avengers Endgame, but this is called Technically Wrong: Sexist Apps, Biased Algorithms, and Other Threats of Toxic Tech by Sarah Wachter-Bottcher. I don't know if I said that right. It's a really good book. It's an easy read, but it's fascinating about how web applications and phone apps are make horrible mistakes based on how they're designed and how they're trained for machine learning and algorithms. So it's a really interesting book. A little infuriating sometimes when you read, that's
about some of the case studies or examples.
Yeah, the angry underbelly of Facebook and Uber. But yeah, it's a good read, and I run a book club, and we're reading it now, so it's good stuff.
I second the recommendation. I actually recommend it at the end of one of my talks.
And then I have another book that piggybacks on Technically Wrong, which is Weapons of Math Destruction. So if you did read Technically Wrong, or you do read Technically Wrong, you like it, you should read Weapons of Math Destruction by Cathy O'Neil.
I haven't read that one, so I'll have to check it out.
Adding these to my Kindle list.
Cool. And then my picks today are first Star Trek Deep Space Nine. This is not new, but it's something that I've been rewatching occasionally lately. And for me, like this is actually my favorite Star Trek series. And it was, like a lot of Star Trek series, like a big part of my childhood. And I found like a lot of role models in this series. And it's unlike any other Star Trek series. There's a lot more like politics and relationships that are really interesting. I can't recommend that enough, especially if you've never checked out Star Trek before. I'd say definitely check it out. And you can probably skip a lot of episodes, especially in the first season. And I'll actually drop a link to a skippable list in the show notes in case you just want the really good stuff. My second pick is the DBT Skills Training Manual. DBT stands for Dialectical Behavioral Therapy. And for anyone that sometimes struggles with emotion regulation, as many humans do, I find there's a lot of stuff in here that's really, really, really useful. Yeah, I mean, not only like when you're feeling, really overwhelmed with emotion, but just like dealing with emotion long term. And it's so practical. Like a lot of therapies, can be a little bit more like higher level and, more about like analyzing, traumas in your childhood. And it's a little bit harder to get results. But with these skills, like you can start seeing results right away. It's really nice. And you can also find therapists that specialize in dialectical behavioral therapy if you check it out and you find it really useful. And my final pick is, I think I've talked about this before on the podcast, but reading to like your partners. Like a lot of people read to their children, and that's like a fun bonding activity. But like reading to your partners is something that can also be really fun. And especially if you have like a theater background like me and you enjoy making voices sometimes, it can be so much fun. And if you're looking for like a good book to start off reading to a partner, I would recommend Ted Chiang's Stories of Your Life and Others, although I might skip the first story and start with the second one because I don't like the first story as much, but all the others are pretty good. It's really, really great speculative fiction, and it's short stories, so it's not a big commitment. You're not asking your partner, hey, do you mind if we like read a whole novel together? You could instead of read a short story and maybe like split it out into like, 2 or 3 different sessions.
The important question is, do you do sound effects, Chris?
Of course. You've met me. I mean, I do sound effects for my own life.
This reminds me of a book I read to my daughter last night, or my children have both read it, but it's called The Book with No Pictures.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the name of it, The Book with No Pictures. It's actually written by B.J. Novak.
Yes, I heard about that one.
Which surprised me when my kids brought it home. Like, you have a book written by B.J. Novak in your backpack? What?
Isn't that like B.J. Novak on The Office? Doesn't he play?
Yes. Ryan, the temp.
Ryan, yeah.
Ryan the temp. Oh no, the intern. Wait, was he the temp or the intern?
He's a temp.
Yeah, I think he's a temp.
But yeah, it's a kid's book, but it's the whole point of this book is that whoever's reading it out loud is stuck reading it out loud, and then it gets really weird to read, and it has like all sorts of like words that aren't words and sounds that aren't words that you are clearly stuck reading because you're reading this book. It's very funny.
That's funny. I'll have to check that out. Would I also enjoy it as an adult, or
if you were reading it to your partner, you'd have a good laugh.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good. That's a good recommendation then. Okay, Ben, how would you like to take us out today? You can say no because I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna let you take us out today, Chris.
Okay.
Yep.
Well then, thank you everyone for joining us this week on Views in View, and until next week, enjoy the view.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CacheFly.com to learn more.